Today on CG Off-Road, we're going to give our 2015 Ram a killer look with some extra ground clearance. Rams come right from the factory with some serious rake on the front, which is great for towing, but it just doesn't look that great. So today we're going to give our 2015 Ram a killer stance by installing a ReadyLIFT Leveling Kit. This is ReadyLIFT's 2-inch Strut Extension Leveling Kit designed to fit your 2006 to 18 Ram. They're made of high-quality 60-61 billet aluminum, and they're designed to go on top of the front struts rather than using a spring preload spacer for an easy install and to maintain the factory ride quality. They're going to lift the front of your Ram 2 inches for more ground clearance and for room up to a 35-inch tire. For more information and pricing, click the link in the description down below. Now let's get to the install. Tools you'll need for this installation: a lift or a jack and jack stands, 7mm socket, 8mm socket, 1/4-inch ratchet, 10mm socket, 13mm socket, 15mm socket, 3/8 ratchet, 21mm socket, 24mm socket, 1/2-inch ratchet, 14mm wrench, 15mm wrench, 16mm wrench, 18mm wrench, 21mm wrench, 24mm wrench, and a hammer. Okay, we have the truck up in the air with the wheels off. The first thing we're going to do is remove the sway bar end link from the lower control arm with an 18mm wrench and an 8mm socket. Remove the lower strut bolt with a 24mm socket and a 21mm wrench. To give us a little bit more slack with the brake hose, we're going to remove this bolt right here that secures the brake hose to the frame. Loosen the upper ball joint nut with a 21mm wrench and a 10mm socket, but don't remove it just yet. Just loosen it. Separate the ball joint from the steering knuckle by striking it with a hammer. To make this job a little easier, we're also going to remove the outer tie rod from the steering knuckle. 21mm wrench and a 10mm socket. Just like with the upper ball joint, we're going to strike it with a hammer to dislocate the two. And now we'll fully remove the ball joint nut. Remove the 3 nuts on top of the strut. They're all 15mm. We can now remove the lower strut bolt. You're going to need to spin it while tapping it with a hammer. Both the front and rear lower control arm bolts will need to be loosened. What we're going to do to make this alignment as easy as possible once it's done, we're going to mark these cam bolts to try to get them back in the exact same position. That way our alignment isn't too far off after this leveling kit. So just make a mark, and then when you go to tighten these back up, once it's done, just line it up with the paint. Use a 24mm socket to loosen the front and rear lower control arm bolts. And loosen the rear bolt as well. To separate the sway bar end link from the lower control arm, you may need to loosen or remove the upper portion as well. The strut can now be removed. The ReadyLIFT strut spacer can now be installed. It will only go on one way, so you can't get it wrong. And now you're going to secure it to the strut with the OEM nuts. The strut can now be installed, but it can't go back in the same way that it came out. Because of the design of the spacer, you have to rotate it 180 degrees. Secure the strut to the top of the strut mount with the provided nuts. Tighten the nuts with a 14mm wrench. Now everything gets reattached in the reverse order that we took it apart. Lift up on the lower control arm to align it with the strut to install the lower strut bolt. Attach the tie rod. Reinstall the sway bar end link. Install the nut on the bottom and then tighten it down. Connect the upper control arm to the steering knuckle. You gotta pull down on it pretty good to get the threads to show. Then install the nut. Now we're going to fully tighten up the top and bottom of the sway bar end link. Tighten the lower strut bolt. Make sure your ABS line is reattached. Last thing we're going to tighten up is the lower control arm camber bolts. Now you want to make sure you line it up with your mark that you made earlier, and then once it's lined up, you tighten the nut, not the bolt. Now you can repeat the same process for the other side, and your install is finished. Okay, we got our ReadyLIFT leveling kit installed on our 2015 Ram, and as you can see, it lifted the front of the truck up about 2 inches, makes it look a whole lot better, completely changed the look, and it gave us a little bit more room for a larger tire when we go to swap wheels on this thing. I'd give yourself 4 hours to do this, and before you know it, you'll be heading off-road.